Where am I? It's completely dark, I can't see a thing. The last thing I remember was blacking out at my mother-in-law's funeral. Now, I had regained consciousness, only to find myself trapped in a tight, box-like space. Panic surged through me as I frantically pushed against the lid, pounding with all my strength, desperate to escape. Then, I heard footsteps approaching. A man's voice rang out, "All right, it's time for the cremation." Suddenly, the box I was in began to shake. My breath caught in my throat. Was I inside a coffin? The realization hit me like a lightning bolt. They were about to cremate me alive. Terror coursed through my veins. Was this how I was going to be sent to the afterlife? My name is Olivia. At 24, I married Ethan, who was 2 years older than me and worked at City Hall. Although we didn't live with his parents, his mother resided nearby. She was warm and approachable, always telling me, "Olivia, if you ever need anything, just let me know." Having lost my own parents at a young age, she became like a real mother to me. For a while, my husband and I had a happy marriage, but things changed after the second year. Arguments became more frequent, mostly about money. Ethan's reckless spending was draining our finances. "You need money for living expenses? You work full-time too, don't you? So, you must have some cash," he snapped. "I've been covering rent, utilities, and groceries all on my own since last year." "You need to contribute your fair share," I insisted. "All you ever talk about is money, money, money. Do you think I'm some kind of ATM?" Ethan would always dodge the conversation, locking himself in his room rather than facing the issue. Despite his stable income as a civil servant, he refused to contribute a dime to the household. Instead, he spent his nights out drinking with colleagues, coming home late and broke. I couldn't go on like this. Out of sheer desperation, I took on a second job, working at a pub at night in addition to my daytime insurance job. I confided in my mother-in-law about it. "You shouldn't push yourself so hard." "I'll have a word with Ethan," she said, concern evident in her voice. The usually reserved woman was livid when she discovered I had started working nights. "I've talked to him about this countless times, but he never listens," she fumed. "I understand. I'm really sorry about my foolish son," she sighed. "If only my husband were still alive, maybe he could have set him straight." My father-in-law had passed away before I even married Ethan. Seeing her so distressed, she offered to help me financially, but I couldn't accept money from a woman who was living alone. "I'll try to have another serious talk with Ethan," I reassured her. "At the very least, let me drive you to and from the pub," she insisted. "I can't let you shoulder all of this alone." With her support, I was able to earn enough to keep our household afloat. She was a skilled driver, and our car rides together became moments of comfort, filled with light-hearted conversations. I knew she frequently warned Ethan about his reckless spending, but he never took her seriously. Then one morning, just as I was about to leave for work, Ethan nonchalantly dropped a bombshell. "Hey, Mom's funeral is tomorrow. Get ready." I froze. "What? What are you talking about?" His tone remained indifferent. "She died in a car accident." The shock hit me like a tidal wave. "What do you mean? What exactly happened?" Ethan's expression darkened. "Shut up. Are you seriously wasting my time with this before work? At least say, 'Have a good day' or something." With that, he stormed out, leaving me reeling. This couldn't be real. His mother, gone? How? I had seen firsthand how careful she was when she drove me to and from the pub. No matter how many times I pressed him for details, he refused to answer. It felt as though the ground beneath me had collapsed. The grief was unbearable, but there was no time to process it. "I have a friend at the funeral home. Handle the arrangements with him." "I'm too busy with work," Ethan said before disappearing again, leaving everything to me. For the next day and a half, I struggled to prepare for my mother-in-law's farewell, completely alone. Then, on the day of the funeral, Ethan finally showed up, grinning. The sight of him sent a chill down my spine. I rushed over. "Where have you been?" Your phone was off. But he wouldn't even meet my eyes. You were out all night, weren't you? I pressed, but my husband gave a dismissive shrug. Not really. Throughout the funeral, Ethan barely showed any emotion. While he occasionally exchanged a few words with the guests, he spent most of the time yawning, even nodding off at points. I couldn't believe it. How could he be so indifferent to losing such a kind and caring mother? Disappointment weighed heavily on me as I watched his detached behavior. Then, out of nowhere, he shot me a sharp glance. Go grab my spare cigarettes and lighter from the car. I hesitated. As the chief mourner, Ethan should have been staying at the venue, but his tone carried an unusual edge, so I obeyed and headed toward the parking lot. I don't see them, I muttered after searching the front seat. Unable to find anything, I shifted to check the back seat. That's when something blocked the sunlight behind me, casting a shadow over the car. Is someone there? Before I could turn around, a sudden, heavy thud landed on my head, sending a searing pain through my skull. Everything blurred into darkness. I blacked out before I could even comprehend what had happened. I had no idea how much time had passed when I finally stirred. A pounding headache greeted me, throbbing with relentless intensity. My surroundings were pitch black, so dark it felt like my eyes were still shut. Where am I? I tried to sit up, but my movement was restricted. My body was confined in a narrow, box-like space. Panic surged as I pushed against the walls, pounding desperately in an attempt to break free. Then, I heard footsteps approaching. A man's voice spoke, "All right, it's time for the cremation." The box trembled as it was moved. A chilling realization struck me like a lightning bolt. Was I inside a coffin? Terror exploded in my chest. They were about to burn me alive. Let me out. I'm still alive. Help. I banged my fists against the wooden surface with all my strength, screaming at the top of my lungs. My heartbeat pounded in my ears as the seconds stretched into eternity. Then, muffled voices. Hey, did you hear that? There's a sound coming from inside. Moments later, the coffin lid creaked open. A rush of fresh air flooded in, and I gasped. I had narrowly escaped being cremated alive. My entire body trembled, my face pale as death itself. The crematorium staff, looking equally stunned, hesitated before explaining the situation. According to them, my husband had arranged for me to be sent off alongside his beloved mother in a rushed, urgent funeral. But what shocked me most was the official cause of my supposed death. I was listed as having fallen down the stairs. That's impossible. I was in the parking lot looking for cigarettes and a lighter when I was attacked. A cold realization crept over me. The parking lot was small. That meant the person who did this was either a funeral attendee or a staff member. Someone close. I made a split-second decision. Please don't tell my husband I'm alive, I begged the staff. Let him believe the cremation was completed. As it turned out, Ethan hadn't even attended his own mother's cremation. He had simply instructed the staff to mail him the ashes, claiming he was leaving for a 3-day trip. Is that even allowed? His behavior made me uneasy. Something wasn't adding up. But if I wanted to uncover the truth, it was best to let him believe I was gone. Then, one of the staff members hesitated before revealing something that sent ice through my veins. What? That's horrible. Rage boiled inside me. This wasn't just a mistake, this was intentional. Someone had tried to kill me. I clenched my fists. I would make them pay. But first, I needed proof, something solid to bring to the police. Over the next few days, I stayed at a hotel, visiting law offices and gathering evidence. My search led me to my mother-in-law's house, where I stumbled upon something she had left behind, something that would change everything. With everything I had gathered, I was finally ready to confront the person responsible. Several days after my near cremation, I returned home. As I stepped into the living room, I found my husband sprawled on the couch, a Boston bag tossed carelessly beside him. He must have just come back from his so-called trip and was taking time off work to rest. His eyes landed on me, and widened in absolute shock. "Olivia, why are you alive?" he stammered, nearly toppling over. I crossed my arms, my gaze unwavering. "I heard you were busy flirting with your mistress during the funeral home meeting. I came back from the afterlife because I was too angry to stay there." I snarled, my glare burning with fury as I shouted even louder than Ethan's stunned cry. The shocking revelation I had learned from the crematorium staff wasn't just about my near-death experience, it was about my husband's affair. Apparently, while I was supposedly being prepared for cremation, Ethan had been beaming as he introduced his mistress to the staff. "This is my girlfriend," he had told them, grinning. "We're about to go on a trip." Unbelievable. Who brings their mistress along when they're about to cremate their own wife? "You're the absolute lowest," I spat, pulling a stack of incriminating photos from my handbag and tossing them onto the living room table. They scattered across the surface, pictures of Ethan cozied up with another woman, credit card statements detailing extravagant purchases. His eyes widened in shock at the mountain of evidence before him. I had already begun digging into his so-called 3-day trip. Tracing his transactions from the first night, I tracked down their hotel and rushed there immediately. And what did I find? My husband, arm in arm with a young woman, looking utterly smitten. They wined and dined at high-end restaurants, while he lavished her with luxury brand bags and expensive accessories. "You had the audacity to cheat on me while I was working myself to exhaustion, and even when I was lying in a coffin?" My voice shook with anger. "You absolute monster. And no, wait. This isn't what it looks like." Ethan stammered, his forehead breaking into a nervous sweat. "It was business entertainment. Yeah. I was just asked to accompany a client's daughter. It was tough, you know?" "Oh really?" I feigned a gasp. "I see. My mistake." His expression shifted instantly, his usual arrogance creeping back in. "See? You always overreact. You're so dense sometimes," he scoffed, puffing up his chest. This was Ethan's usual game. He'd twist reality, undermine my confidence, and do as he pleased while draining me financially. But not this time. Not anymore. I smiled slyly and pulled out a small voice recorder from my bag. "Well then, wouldn't you like to hear your beloved mistress's voice?" His eyes flickered with suspicion, but I calmly pressed play. From the speaker came a familiar voice, his mistress's voice, spilling every dirty detail of their relationship. Before returning home, I had tracked her down and confronted her at her apartment. The moment she saw me, the wife she believed had been cremated, she let out a blood-curdling scream. She must have thought I was a vengeful ghost come to haunt her. "If you confess everything, I'll consider letting you off with just financial compensation," I had told her in a cold, steady voice. Terrified, she trembled and broke down in tears. "I'm so sorry," she sobbed. Then, between hiccups, she confessed everything while I recorded her. As it turned out, she was a staff member at City Hall, the same place Ethan worked. He had relentlessly pursued her, showering her with lavish gifts despite her knowing he was married. Their affair had begun in the second year of our marriage, coinciding with the time his reckless spending had spiraled out of control. I tried to resist, but he was so persistent. She wailed in the recording. He kept giving me expensive brand name gifts. I thought it was just harmless fun. Then came the final blow, her voice dripping with disdain. "It's not like I loved him or anything. Come on, who could ever fall for an old man like that?" Ethan's face twisted in horror. "And no way," he mumbled, turning to me with an indescribable expression. "So not only were you cheating," I said, smirking, "but your mistress didn't even love you. Too bad, huh? After all that money you wasted on her." I burst into laughter at his pitiful state, but he stomped his foot like a child throwing a tantrum. "Lucas, laugh. She told me she loved me. I gave her so many gifts." His voice cracked as if he were on the verge of tears. But the recording wasn't done. The final words of his mistress rang through the room like a death sentence. "It was just for the money. That's really all it was. The truth was brutal. And then, I delivered the final strike. You racked up $60,000 in debt just to keep her entertained, I said coldly, thrusting a stack of loan documents toward him. You worthless fool. I held the document in front of Ethan's face, the very paper I had found while searching his study during his little getaway. But that wasn't all. When I checked his credit card statements on his computer, I uncovered proof of his reckless spending over the past 2 years. The reason I couldn't reach him the day before and the day of his mother's funeral? Simple. He had dumped all the funeral preparations onto me while he waltzed off on a trip with his mistress. Your mother must be crying in the afterlife, I said coldly. How much more unfilial can you be? Ethan scoffed, waving dismissively. It's not like I had to prepare the ceremony myself. You're overreacting. As my wife, you should have been happy to handle it. I clenched my fists. Even now, he dared to act like this was normal? But his lack of filial piety wasn't the worst of it. You did something even more despicable, I growled, my eyes burning with rage. You tampered with your mother's car to cause that accident, didn't you? Ethan stiffened. His face turned ghostly pale as he hung his head. I had uncovered the truth while investigating the person who had attacked me. While digging, I spoke to the funeral home staff and learned new details about my mother-in-law's accident. She had been a skilled driver, careful, experienced. And yet, according to the police report, she had supposedly mistaken the brake for the accelerator while parking near a store by her home. Her car had burst through the fence and plunged into the river, never to resurface. It was deemed an unfortunate accident, just another case of pedal confusion. After all, a similar accident had happened at that very spot a year prior. The authorities didn't question it. But I did. It was completely out of character for my mother-in-law to make such a mistake. Something felt off, so I launched my own investigation. Reaching into my bag, I pulled out a folder and placed it on the table before Ethan. This, I said, is the accident report from a private investigation company specializing in traffic incidents. Ethan swallowed hard, his breath shallow as he stared at the documents. Luckily, the car had not yet been fully dismantled at the scrapyard. Through my insurance company connections, I managed to have it examined by specialists. Their findings were damning. The brakes had been deliberately tampered with. The car wasn't just old. It had been sabotaged. It was a death trap waiting to spring. It could just be deterioration, Ethan stammered, his forehead beading with sweat. His lips were nearly as white as his face. I narrowed my eyes. If that were true, then explain this. I flipped to the page containing the forensic analysis. The investigation company had lifted fingerprints from the tampered brake system, fingerprints that had no reason to be there during normal driving. I slid the photo across the table. These prints are yours, aren't they? Ethan's eyes widened. His mouth opened as if to argue, but no words came. Instead, his hands slowly rose to cover his face. Silence. And then you came for me next, I said, my voice cold and quiet. Why would I target you? He shot back, his voice trembling. If I wanted the inheritance, Mom alone would have been enough. I watched him carefully, his desperate denial, his quivering tone, the way he kept glancing toward the door as if contemplating an escape. I reached into my bag one last time. You might want to explain this, then. I pulled out my mother-in-law's diary and her will, the very items I had found while he was busy frolicking with his mistress. I placed them before him, the final pieces of his downfall. The diary was written in my mother-in-law's own hand, and within its pages lay the truth: do not let my wasteful son inherit my estate. My inheritance goes to my hard-working daughter-in-law. Ethan's body went rigid. And that wasn't all. She had ensured her wishes would be upheld by appointing a lawyer as the executor of her will. His name and contact details were clearly written in the document. It was then that I realized this was the same man Ethan had been speaking to at his mother's funeral. I had seen them deep in conversation, my husband's demeanor oddly eager despite the somber event. Curious, I had tracked the lawyer down. And when I asked about my mother-in-law's will, he revealed the final, damning truth. Ethan had been pushing him, insisting he speed up the process. At the funeral, the lawyer informed you that, according to the will, the inheritance was to be passed on to your wife, didn't he? And he specifically mentioned that he had been instructed to notify you only after the funeral had concluded. That's why I was planning to tell you afterward. When my husband heard this revelation, his expression twisted as if he were about to scream. Upon realizing that the property you had been relying on to settle your debts wouldn't be yours, panic set in. That's when you lured me into the car and struck me from behind, am I wrong? Even after getting rid of your mother, the inheritance still eluded you, so you intended to silence me, the true beneficiary, ensuring that next time, the fortune would be yours. As I locked eyes with my husband and stated this with unwavering certainty, he lowered his head in silence. You can't prove that I did it, he muttered. Oh? I even managed to secure the weapon, I countered. His face paled as I continued. I wiped the blood off the ashtray and placed it back where it belonged. His body stiffened. How? How did you know it was an ashtray? He stammered. The moment I sharply questioned him, Ethan's composure began to crack. In truth, while my husband had been away on a trip, I had meticulously investigated every possible clue: our home, the car where I had been attacked, the funeral home, and even the parking lot. The car, which was usually a chaotic mess, had been cleaned to an unnatural degree. There wasn't a single trace of blood, likely because he had gone through the trouble of having it washed thoroughly. I couldn't locate a weapon inside, but I refused to give up. Instead, I collected the car's floor mats and continued my search. Even at the funeral home, no clear evidence presented itself. Exhausted, I slumped down on the curb in the parking lot, feeling the weight of despair pressing down on me. But then, something caught my eye, tiny shards of glass glinting within the grooves of a drain cover. As I inspected them closely, I noticed small red stains on some of the pieces. Nearby, I spotted what appeared to be dried tobacco leaves. It clicked, I realized these fragments could have come from an ashtray. That day, at my mother-in-law's funeral, I distinctly recalled my husband fussing about where he could smoke. The staff had directed him to the rooftop terrace. Following that memory, I made my way there. Just as I suspected, glass ashtrays were provided for smokers. Upon closer inspection, I discovered that one of them had a chipped base. That must have been his initial attempt to dispose of the weapon, by smashing it on the ground. But in doing so, a bloodstained shard must have broken off. After piecing everything together, I borrowed the ashtray and had it examined through my lawyer. The results were damning. It tested positive for my blood, and my husband's fingerprints were all over it. You were the one who attacked me, I said firmly. Ethan, now completely exposed, dropped to his knees and ran a hand through his hair. I'm sorry, he pleaded. You're the only one I love. I got jealous. My friend had a mistress, so I tried to imitate him. He desperately pointed toward a man from the funeral home. That guy, he's an old friend of mine. He blurted, as if that explained anything. Just as he scrambled to make excuses, my phone rang. It was the lawyer. After listening to what he had to say, my blood ran cold. My gaze snapped back to my husband. You forged documents, and conspired with that so-called friend to have me burned alive, didn't you? The lawyer had been checking on how my supposed death was being processed by the city office. According to him, I hadn't been officially recorded as deceased. Instead, I was listed as a missing person. Normally, a cremation permit requires a death certificate issued by a doctor, which must then be submitted to city officials. But my husband, impatient to have me disposed of, had tried to bypass that process entirely. A hospital staff member, abusing his authority as a city hall employee, had forged official documents to facilitate the process. This underhanded method succeeded because the person overseeing the cremation was my husband's friend. However, as fate would have it, that friend had been on sick leave since the day I was supposed to be cremated. While I was confronting my husband, the lawyer had gone to speak with this friend in person. Shortly after, he called me with an urgent report. Ethan's friend, now a shell of his former self, had been consumed by guilt over his role in arranging my supposed cremation. Overcome with remorse, he confessed everything, revealing that my husband had coerced him. "I'll give you a share of the inheritance as a reward," my husband had threatened. "But if you refuse, I'll expose your affair." Faced with such a threat, the man had no choice but to comply. However, upon learning that I was still alive, he broke down in relief, sobbing as he apologized. The lawyer ended the call with a final warning. "I'm on my way with the police. We'll be there soon." My fury boiled over as I turned back to my husband. "You're the lowest of the low. You dragged even your own friend into your sick schemes. You tried to kill both your mother and your wife. Go to hell." At my outburst, Ethan could no longer muster any excuses. He collapsed onto the floor, trembling and defeated. $50,000 in compensation, I declared coldly. "On top of that, I'll be demanding $10,000 from your mistress. And, of course, you won't see a single cent of your mother's inheritance. As for your $60,000 debt, you can pay that off yourself." Ethan's eyes widened in sheer panic. "No. There's no way. I can't possibly pay such a huge amount." He looked at me with desperation, tears streaming down his face. "Please, forgive me. We're close, aren't we?" As he tried to grab my hand, I shoved him away with all my strength. "Lucas, think you can get away with consuming people in your greed," I spat. "You'll suffer for the rest of your life." At those words, Ethan completely broke down, sobbing uncontrollably, his face a mess of tears and snot. A while later, the lawyer arrived with the police. I watched as my husband was dragged away, and for the first time in a long while, I felt a weight lift from my chest. Looking up at the clear blue sky, I couldn't help but think that my mother-in-law must be smiling, knowing that justice had finally been served. In the days that followed, I wasted no time finalizing my divorce from Ethan. With his arrest, news of his affair spread, and both he and his mistress were fired from their jobs. Now, he faces trial, and according to my lawyer, he could be behind bars for years. Even if he does get released, he'll spend the rest of his life drowning in debt, $50,000 in compensation, plus the $60,000 he already owed. As for me, I've fully recovered and finally regained control over my life. My work in insurance sales has been going well, and I was recently headhunted by an international company. On top of that, I reconnected with an old boyfriend at a class reunion, and he's been helping me transition into a new career. Things are looking brighter than ever. Perhaps all this good fortune is thanks to my mother-in-law watching over me from above. I've been thinking about donating her inheritance, leaving it untouched. That should be okay, right?